Good morning, everybody, and a very happy Easter to all of you on this fantastic morning when we celebrate the presence of the risen Christ at the very heart of the church and of the world. So this morning we're going to explore the Easter story. And this image is one that is close to my heart. It's of daffodils. And not just any daffodils, but these are reputed to be Wordsworth's daffodils on the northern shore of Lake Ullswater. And I love daffodils at this time of year. You get the lockdown of winter when everything is frozen hard and cold and all of nature is waiting, its life seemingly in abeyance until the warmth comes once more. And then all the ecosystems start to kick back into life, energy starts to flow, and everywhere we just see an abundance of green and colour. And these daffodils are just wonderful, the signifiers of Easter and springtime. And of course, in the Easter story, we find ourselves in a lockdown of hope. We find ourselves in a narrative where all of those who are described, those who are in the story, are suffering. They're in despair. They've lost hope. They think it's the end. They can't see any way ahead because Jesus is dead. And they saw him die. They saw him die cruelly on a Roman cross. And early in the morning, here they are coming to the tomb. A tomb that has been closed shut. It's a story of death and despair. It's the end. And yet, when they get there, that's not what they find. And in this moment, as John describes it, we are facing the very worst with Jesus. His body has gone. Mary comes, she sees, she runs back. She tells Simon Peter and the beloved disciple, and they go to the tomb and they see that emptiness. The worst of all nightmares come true. And yet, in this story, the presence of Jesus brings new and wonderful life. It's such a beautiful story, is this, as John tells it. Mary goes into the tomb, the angels speak to her, she comes out and she thinks she sees the gardener and engages in a conversation. But as soon as he speaks her name, she knows it is her Lord. She knows it is Jesus. A moment of wonderful testimony and exclamation as she says, Rabboni. Jesus brings new life beyond all expectation, new life beyond all hoping, new life in the most wonderful way imaginable in this story. When I went to the Yorkshire Sculpture Park a few years ago now, I saw this fantastic installation from Jaume Plensa, a Spanish sculptor and worker with metal. And this one is called Spiegel 1 and 2. As you can see, there are a pair of figures that are an open meshed work of metal in which you can go and stand. You can actually stand inside the figures. And as ever, he works with words, and the figures are made of words. If we look at it closely, I want to suggest to you that here is a fabulous image of Easter's truth. This is what John is getting at in the story he tells. You've got that sad group of people coming at daybreak, and they're confronted with the end. They're confronted with Jesus having gone, his body disappeared, their grief is overwhelming. And then Jesus brings new life. If you look at the left-hand figure, you can see there is a young woman standing inside it, illuminated by the light of dawn. That seems to me is where Mary stood. She stood within the risen presence of Jesus, the living Word of God, whose word overwhelmed and empowered, enfolded her in that moment in the garden. And then she tells the others, and if you look at the right-hand side of the image, you can see the others going in and experiencing that presence for themselves as the risen Christ inhabits them, and they live within his presence on that first Easter day, and everything is transformed. You can see why I love the image. It speaks so powerfully to me of that risen Christ experience at the centre of Easter Day, which is Mary's gift from God. And it brings to mind for me the passage from Jeremiah we've heard, which I think frames Easter Day, just as it would have framed Jesus' own understanding of what God wanted. Because in that wonderful text in Jeremiah chapter 31, God says these words, "I have loved you with an everlasting love." Just stop for a moment and think about that. That's what God is saying to you on this Easter morning. It's why Easter happened. I have loved you with an everlasting love. That's why we have Easter. This is God's intention from the beginning of creation. God's love poured out to each and to all. And here on Easter Day, that's what we're celebrating. And the prophet Jeremiah goes on to say that God's promise will come again and again and again. God will be with the people. God will bring new life and they will see it, and the nation will be restored. It's a wonderful promise and instruction of hope. And in that empty tomb, that promise takes shape and form, and in the garden Mary meets it face to face in the presence of the risen Christ, and she walks straight into it like the woman in the image here. She walks straight into it, and the words and the letters of those ancient promises from God become her truth, shapes who she is, just like the sculpture. And she goes back and she tells the disciples, and later that day, in that upper room, Christ comes in his risen presence, stands in their midst, and breathes his Spirit upon them, and they stand in that awesome place of promise and new life too. I have loved you with an everlasting love. And Mary then gives the Easter testimony par excellence. She says to her friends, "I have seen the Lord." And she has. She's been enfolded. She has inhabited his presence. He has filled her. She now is transformed, and she'll never be the same again, nor will we. Because we have entered the living Word. We, his Easter people, have stood within the wonder of his truth and owned it for ourselves, and have shone with his grace. We have seen the Lord. And so Jesus on Easter Day takes all that is hopeless, all that is deathly, all that has no promise, and he opens up a new dimension, because that is at the heart of Easter Day, a new dimension which gives hope and optimism to this needy, suffering, longing world. And I tried to capture that in this image. The figure of Christ is from Laund Abbey, a retreat centre in Rutland. It's a big sculpture that stands outside the house. And here I've used it to represent the risen Christ standing in front of Mary. Not just the risen Christ, but the cosmic Christ. Here present from the heart of eternity. Here present beyond death. Here present from the heart of God's eternal love, his everlasting love for you and me, Jesus opens up a new dimension of hope and promise, because he stands here from eternity itself, beyond life and death. He stands there in front of Mary, and she inhabits this new dimension of truth, which is for all of us, as the promise comes alive and we can feel it. Now that is a springtime worth celebrating. Just as the daffodils have come up, so too this promise has arisen in his presence within you and me, has arisen for the sake of the whole world. From the heart of eternity, the promise is ours. We are loved with an everlasting love, and we have seen the Lord. May God bless us all with that wonderful truth on this fabulous Easter day.